the only way that there's going to ultimately be more and better climate coverage as more journalists are laid off and as climate teams keep getting gutted like this is that every journalist needs to make it their responsibility to be a climate journalist.
Mhm.
It ultimately can't just be on the shoulders of environmental reporters to make this their story. It needs to be a story for everyone. It needs to be a story for, I mean, it really needs to be a story for politics reporters who I think, have some of the, unfortunately, some of the poorest track record of, taking responsibility for stating the truth plainly and holding one of the two major political parties, that being the Republican Party, to task for their failures. But it needs to be a story for political reporters and for sports reporters and for weather reporters and for
Health,
breaking news
health,
reporters,
health.
health reporters, absolutely, immigration reporters. It's an everyone story. Everyone needs to be taking the climate crisis seriously. It can't just be an environment story.
Hi, welcome back to another edition of Code Green. I have a very special guest, Sammy Roth. We met at the Hollywood Climate Summit last June. He has a wonderful blog and maybe a podcast, Climate Colored Goggles, since we always talk about, rose-colored glasses, green-colored glasses. These are not my green ones today, but I've been telling people just look through that green lens, put those green lenses, those green glasses on and see the world differently. I do love the name.
Thank you.
Certainly original. But before that, you were a climate columnist with the LA Times. And prior to that, reporting on energy issues with the LA Times. You left, I think, last fall to focus exclusively on your own thing, which is not so bad being independent in this media world. But what we're going to talk about first is when you don't want to lose your corporate media job because you are reporting on climate change and perhaps haven't been doing that for so long. We've just seen Washington Post just obliterate their staff, including, if not their entire, then most of their team. And also, of course, there were similar firings at CBS. And that was before Barry Weiss came in. And I've learned from your reporting that she is not a friend of the climate. Of course, being a conservative, heaven forbid you want to conserve our home, our resources. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, lots to talk about. Yeah, I was at the Desert Sun and USA Today before the LA Times. Now I'm doing Climate Colored Goggles, which yeah, is a newsletter that you can sign up for, climatecoloredgoggles.com. Not a podcast as of yet. I was doing a podcast for the LA Times. Maybe I'll get back to podcasting someday, I hope. But yeah, what's going on at the Post is brutal. Unfortunately, a larger reflection of just media withdrawal, legacy media withdrawal from climate coverage. But one of the worst examples we've seen, and it's my God, it's so bad. I mean, what I learned, I mean, so what? The Post newsroom, what's been reported is that of the 800 uh, people at the Post, what, more than 300 laid off, got a third of the newsroom. And so when I saw that news coming out, I thought, gee, they have one of the best climate desks in America, certainly one of the largest and definitely one of the best. They won a Pulitzer in 2020 for their climate coverage, which I'm pretty sure is the only time, with the possible addition of the Exxon new coverage that Inside Climate News and the LA Times did in maybe 15 years ago now, where they exposed the history of climate denial by the oil industry. That probably counts as a climate Pulitzer as well, but this is probably the only other one winning a Pulitzer Prize for climate coverage. So, I mean, they were excellent. And in 2022, they expanded the climate team to more than 30 people. So they were great. They were really essential. They were real hard hitting on the Trump administration and the environmental rollbacks. They were looking at the impacts of rising temperatures and extreme weather at a local level. They were doing stuff that hardly anyone else was doing with that kind of rigor and volume. So when I saw the news about the larger, cutbacks to the Washington Post newsroom, I just thought, okay, this is scary. What's going to happen to the climate team? And I know people there. So I started reaching out and talking with folks on the inside and just immediately saw that it was going to be quite a bloodbath. And the final tally that I was able to piece together was that 14 climate journalists lost their jobs, were given layoff notices, eight writer reporters, one editor, and then five others who were either data visual journalists, video journalists, graphics reporters. So at least 14 that I was able to count up. That left five writers on that desk, and possibly a few other folks. I wasn't clear how many others were left, but definitely more than half the desk was gone, and possibly closer to two-thirds It was bad. It was really, really bad. And the people who are left there, I mean, there are some great people that are left on that desk, but as a whole, it's a shell of what it was before.
Any clue as to why they let some but not all go? And isn't that Washington Post? Don't they have the climate coach column? I think that's what the paper that does it. It's a great column. It's like climate therapy. Send
Yeah,
us
they do.
questions.
They
Yeah, I
do.
don't know if he was saved
Yeah,
or not.
yeah, no, I believe that's yeah, Michael Corrin that you're talking about. I believe he is still there.
Okay.
That's my
Okay, the,
understanding.
the the bigger story is what's going on, not just in climate journalism, but journalism and the climate. This would seem to be, if this was a logical world that made sense, and cared about, our future, near and far term, this would not be happening. It's a time to step up coverage. In fact, you and I know, because we're part of covering climate now, I have been since the start, maybe you have been too, that this was a long time coming. When CBS hired Ben Tracy, and CBS before that, CBS Television, we're talking about, had Jeff Berardelli, who was really great on climate, he meteorologist, but also really tried to work in and did, a lot of climate references, but he was still meteorologist, not a full-time climate reporter. I don't think he left to go down to Florida when he started a family and works for one of the local affiliates, I believe. But Ben Tracy did a great job. And why? And this is before Barry Weiss came in there, and Larry Ellison, Trump's, buddy, started moving things around in the wrong direction. So it's not easy to get a climate reporter or a climate team uh, to be getting rid of most of it at a time when climate change is worsening. We have an administration denying it all out, not even pretending to care or do anything except roll things back, lift regulations on, public health and safety when it comes to emissions. Uh, I'm 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 appalled. Talk about code green, code red, code black. What are your feelings at this time? It's a tough time to be a journalist and a climate advocate and a climate journalist.
Well, I mean, a few thoughts. I think the cuts at the Post to the climate desk, while bad, I didn't get any indication that it was specifically an attempt to silence climate coverage. I mean, things were just so bad at the Post overall. I don't have a good comparison for how the climate desk did relative to other desks. I mean, it sounds like most of the sports department is gone, if not all of it. I don't know the exact figures, but they seem to have fared the worst, and it doesn't seem like there would be any real political reason to go after sports. So I don't really think this was, Bezos or someone specifically saying, let's go after climate. I think it was just sort of a byproduct of the gutting of the newsroom, which, there's reason to think that, in addition to the fact that the Washington Post was losing money, that Bezos may have had political considerations for wanting to do this. He seems to be sucking up to Donald Trump quite a bit. But yeah, the broader media landscape, there have been, all of these climate reporting job losses. I mean, you mentioned CBS. If you look at just climate coverage in general across the industry, the Media and Climate Change Observatory, which is this interesting project, this academic project that UC Boulder and a bunch of other universities run. It doesn't track everything, but if you look at their data, looking at a couple of major U.S. newspapers, including the Post, and then also major U.S. television coverage across broadcast and cable, climate coverage as a whole has been plummeting across legacy institutions in the US. It reached a high point in like fall of 2021, which was sort of around, Biden was president. There were global negotiations happening that seemed like they were making progress. The Inflation Reduction Act hadn't passed yet, but it was starting to look like there was a deal that was going to be made. And then since fall of 2021, it's just been plummeting ever since, which is atrocious. The flip side of that is there is a lot of good independent and nonprofit climate journalism that's happening still. There's outlets like Inside Climate News, which has been around for a while but continuing to grow, and Grist, which again has been around for a while, and then newer ones like Canary Media, which covers the clean energy transition. Then there's plenty of independent voices. I mean, I obviously am one of those, but there's lots of folks who are either getting laid off or deciding to just go independent on their own, who are starting Substacks and freelancing. So it's not like this stuff doesn't exist, but there's less of it at the legacy media outlets that a lot of folks still read, and it's just harder to maintain financially when the institutions that do still have capital aren't supporting it.
The irony is, Jeff Bezos, of course, can continue to afford all those reporters that he just laid off at the Washington Post. It's not about money.
Bezos's net worth as of right now, estimated by Forbes, is $244 billion.
Okay, and just to put a little point on that, this is not about me, but for independent, climate content creators, having been covering the Green Beat for 28, almost 29 years now, having still had to fund it myself because there's almost no support from philanthropists or investors, the millions that
Yeah.
probably billions go into clean tech. Why do you think? I mean, so yes, there's more of us doing this independently, and it is cheaper to do than, I'm not taking a TV crew out across the country, but still, it seems to be, to me, if we don't, as you say, when you covered climate and culture for, um, well, you do now with uh, climate colored goggles, that if we don't have a public that's educated and aware of these problems and connect the dots and focus on solutions, how are we going to solve it? And it's just clear we're not solving, especially with this administration and now with mainstream media, where, as you said, millions of people still watch just morning news on networks.
Yeah, well, two things. One, before I answer your question, I have to correct myself. When I reported the piece about the Post 2 days ago, Bezos was worth $244 billion. I just double checked, and clearly he's had problems in the last 2 days because his net worth is now down to $221 billion. So clearly he can't afford to fund climate journalism anymore. That's an estimate from Forbes once again. You pose an interesting question. I said this in my piece about the Post, and so the first part of the answer is, I mean, clearly we need more and better climate information out there, or it's a necessary precondition to solving this problem. We're not going to get to durable solutions unless there continues to be, unless we get to healthier information ecosystems first. I mean, that's necessary. If we want good public policy, if we want public policy and political solutions that last and don't just whiplash every time the Republican Party retakes power, there needs to be sustained, stronger, louder, more urgent public demand that encompasses a wider part of the political spectrum, or it's just not going to happen in the United States. And so people need better information. They need more information. We need to, all live in the same reality. That said, I also don't think that news media, unfortunately, can accomplish that on its own, even if we had all of the climate journalism that we need and deserve. And that's a sad reflection of political polarization and the fact that it's very easy for people to live in their own bubbles anymore, in their own, just tiny little information silos. If this were the 1950s or even the 1970s or 80s maybe, and most people were getting their
Networks.
news from, yeah, a handful of networks, or just their one national newspaper and one local newspaper, and the local TV station, and a broadcast network, and they were all providing relatively good information. That would be one thing. But it's not. It's easy to tune out good, reliable news and get your information from influencers on TikTok or Fox News or whatever the worst versions of Fox News are, because there are much worse versions, and to anything you hear or see that you disagree with, to just assume it's propaganda and fake. So that's one of the reasons why am gravitating towards writing about climate and culture, because I think it's important for there to be climate storytelling in places like movies and television and sports and advertising and marketing, and museum and theater and music, and sort of non-traditional, non-partisan,
Mhm.
non-traditional, nonpartisan, non-political spaces where people might be more receptive to receiving this information and not just immediately reject it as, oh, this is some, this
Liberal.
is like, yeah, woke
Yep.
partisan, thing that I'm just never going to agree with. So I think we need the news, and I also think we need climate discussion and climate information coming from movie stars and athletes and pop stars and whoever else that people might be more receptive to,
And that is
so that they
beginning
will
to
then demand
happen.
change.
And that was
Yeah.
the focus of the Hollywood Climate Summit. They
Yeah.
didn't focus on news media, unfortunately, but maybe they
Yeah.
will. And you mentioned whiplash. Look at the weather whiplash just in the last week. We've had a couple of polar vortexes. I talked to Andy Revkin last time about that. We have, we've had freezing. Again, I think this is like the third polar vortex wobble, on the East Coast freezing and look at Minneapolis, where these wonderful thousands of protesters have been out there in below freezing weather. In the meantime, West Coast, where we are, it's 60s, almost 70s now. Even Al Roker, who is probably the meteorologist besides maybe Jeff, who's been talking about climate, mentioning it longer, still doesn't. It doesn't get mentioned. And it's like I look at that weather map and I go, whoa, and I think it's getting worse. Climate's getting worse. But too many people, even if they don't watch Fox, not news, I can't ever say Fox News, just aren't aware. And if the mainstream media is not covering it and connecting those dots like they did with COVID, another emergency that impacts life and death, as does climate, how are people going to know what we need to know? And clearly, if we need evidence that they're not very eco-literate, they, half the country at least, voting for Trump, an avowed, proud climate denier, science dunce, again, second time round. And
Yeah.
even this time they were ready. Pull us out of Paris Agreement right away. And all the rollbacks. There's been
You know,
nothing positive done.
COVID is an interesting example and an interesting thing to bring up. And I mentioned this. I did a piece in the fall about the LA Times. There was an analysis that was done by some folks at UCLA showing that in the first 2 months after the Eaton fire and the Palisades fire, the big fires in Los Angeles at the beginning of last year, that the LA Times, who I was working for at the time, that only a very small percentage, like I think 13% of stories about the fires mentioned climate change, which I think is a shame. The environment team, the team that I was on, did a remarkably good job covering the fires and the climate connection, but the paper as a whole, most of the fires stories were being written by folks who were not climate or environment reporters, and they weren't really making that connection. And so I wrote about this analysis, and I talked to some experts and some climate experts and some media experts. And one of the points, God, I'm forgetting who made the point that a lot of journalists, and I've heard this myself, who aren't climate people will say, look, climate change is it's a scientific issue. It's complicated. I'm not an expert in that. It's difficult for me if I'm doing breaking news, especially to bring this into my stories about extreme weather. When I'm working on a tight deadline, I just don't have the knowledge base or the expertise to make that connection quickly. And the response, the response to that, which I think is the right response, is look, y'all did that during COVID. Like this was a global emergency. It was a pandemic. Everybody needed to understand this complicated scientific issue quickly. And
And
at
look,
the end
look
of
how
the,
behavior changed. Look what happened across
yeah,
the world.
you figured it out fast and you gave people the information, and not that that was easy, but you did it, journalists.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, there are parts of climate change that are complicated, and then there are parts that are reasonably easy to learn and explain. The planet's warming. Fossil fuel combustion is the major cause of that, and as a result, heat waves are getting hotter, more people are dying, storms are getting bigger and more extreme. Fires are largely doing the same with some nuances, droughts as well in many areas, floods. You can learn the high level details pretty quickly and make the connection for folks. So I definitely think not only meteorologists but all journalists can be doing that.
So what do you think? Is it, I pitched all the networks because that was my background, CBS network, before I left to cover environmental news exclusively many years ago. And I just hit a wall every single time. Even I get a producer perhaps who said, oh, yeah, we need more climate solutions. Let me talk to my boss. It was during COVID, so they were spread out, never did get a meeting. But the point is, if do you think it hits that ceiling where we can't get through what I call the green ceiling? Or what is it? Because we still don't have, well, we briefly at a couple of networks had the coverage. And even as you say, LA Times only mentioned that the connection during the fires, epic, 13%. What is it? Is it, at what level do you think this is happening? Because no one can claim ignorance anymore, certainly not journalists.
I mean, God, I wish it were a conspiracy theory because that would be easier to solve. I don't. I think that this is no secret. The journalism industry as a whole, it's contracting, it's overwhelmed. People are just scrambled and scatterbrained because there's just so much to do and so few jobs, and jobs are going away all the time. I think that, um, you look at, I think it's sort of a similar version of the phenomenon where you look at polling about climate change, and, as Covering Climate Now has been pointing out, in its 89% project, which you're probably familiar with and others should look up if they're not. You ask people Do you want climate solutions? Do you want stronger climate action? Vast majorities of people in not only other countries, but even in the US will say yes. In the US, the figure is like 74%, depending on how you ask the question. But then also, unfortunately, if you ask people, voters, what are your top priorities? How do you rank your priorities? Climate change is
Way
unfortunately near
down.
the bottom of the list.
Yep. If it
Um,
makes the list at all.
if it makes the list at all. It's 12th or 14th or something. If you get there, and I think that there's a similar thing happening in newsrooms, and I base this not on scientific study, but on anecdotal experience of talking with my colleagues over the years. Like everyone in theory gets that it's important, the non climate and environment folks, and if you press them on it, they'll say, yeah, 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 this is a crisis, and we got to be prioritizing it. In practice, folks are just so overwhelmed by all the other stuff and so used to prioritizing the other stuff and don't feel like they have expertise in climate that it just kind of falls to the wayside most of the time.
And Fox is still calling climate change a hoax. And of course, Trump repeated that in the middle of Climate Week in New York, no less, the biggest green scam ever perpetrated. And they're getting away with this, which to me is getting away with murder because people die like they did with COVID from climate change, especially if they don't think it's real. They get their news from Fox,
Right.
They might not evacuate.
Mhm.
There's real world consequences. They are still actively disinforming the public. I don't know how they get away with that, looking into a lawsuit, but the disinformation, helped bring us Trump and
Hmm.
helping people dismiss climate change. And especially when there's this void, this vacuum in mainstream media, especially networks, until fairly recently again. And now going backwards again. Going backwards at this moment, just everything about it is wrong, right?
It's terrible. It's terrible. No, and it's hard because, with COVID, I mean, this is one of the many reasons it's harder. With COVID, someone dies of COVID, like, that's easy to see and it's, you're there in the hospital, your body giving out and it's on the autopsy. With climate, everything is in many ways it's so much more indirect. Like with a heat wave, the heat part doesn't even appear on the autopsy report sometimes. Like you die of some other cause and it takes scientific study to find correlation and show that okay, these things were probably exacerbated by heat.
Mhm.
And then even if you count like okay, there were 10% more heat related deaths in Maricopa County, Arizona this year than there were last year, like, but then you need to wait for there to be additional studies showing actually there were probably whatever 50% additional heat related deaths that weren't captured by autopsy reports. I'm making up numbers because I don't have them offhand, but it's like there's a lot of stuff that goes missing. And then wildfire deaths. I mean, this is something I'm dealing with all the time in Los Angeles. It's not like climate change ignited a wildfire. I mean, it seems that there was someone who's been accused of arson with the Palisades fire, and it seems likely that there's going to be a finding that a utility wire ignited the Eaton fire. At least that's the leading theory right now. And so then you get into arguments with people about, well, did climate change cause the fire? Well, no, not literally, but it made the conditions a lot more likely to stoke a large fire once the ignition happened.
Like 80 to
Um,
100-mile-an-hour winds. That is not normal in California, where I grew up.
even without getting into the wind conversation, which there's a little more uncertainty about exactly what the role of climate change is, just the dryness of the landscape and the heat, the drought conditions. I mean, there's been a bunch of scientific attribution studies already showing that climate change significantly increased the likelihood of a terrible event like this. But then
That's not
it
even
just,
mentioning the
yeah,
floods and the storms that kill people.
no, but I'm just saying that it just makes it, you got to have those number of connections to get people from fossil fuel combustion to more heat to drier landscapes to, okay, then an ignition happened and more people died. Uh, It should be easy, but it's not. And I mean, you know what I'm talking about here. It's
Yeah, but it's
just,
not going to get easier with these layoffs, with
no,
fewer
it's not.
places connecting those dots.
It's not. And that's why, I mean, I think what we're really coming around to here is that the only way that there's going to ultimately be more and better climate coverage as more journalists are laid off and as climate teams keep getting gutted like this is that every journalist needs to make it their responsibility to be a climate journalist.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been saying that for a while, so I think
Yep.
I'm beating a little bit of a dead horse here, and I've been telling this to my friends and colleagues in the industry for a long time, but it ultimately can't just be on the shoulders of environmental reporters to make this their story. It needs to be a story for everyone. It needs to be a story for I mean, it really needs to be a story for politics reporters who I think, have unfortunately, some of the poorest track record of, taking responsibility for stating the truth plainly and holding one of the two major political parties, that being the Republican Party, to task for their failures. But needs to be a story for political reporters and for sports reporters and for weather reporters and for
Health,
breaking news
health,
reporters,
health.
health reporters, absolutely, immigration reporters. It's an everyone story. Everyone needs to be taking the climate crisis seriously. It can't just be an environment story.
Mhm. Yeah. And, connecting dots, that's something that we who, think too much about climate change, I'll speak for myself, lose sleep over it. That's easy to do because we study it, we report on it, but too much of the public just doesn't get those connections, and that's key. So, when in Texas, where I lived not too far from where those floods happened, um, hill country, and of course Abbott and all crews, they don't acknowledge climate change is real. That has an impact on what people like camp owners do in terms of putting young people right on the river. Yes, it's a flash flood zone, but this is
Mhm.
not your father's floods, as we say. And look at the tragedy there. So it really is culture and communication and media as much as anything else. And I know you have to go and there's so much to do. But one of the things I noticed is all these online, wonderful, online climate, inside climate, and there's many now, Canary, et cetera. There weren't many years ago when a few of us were doing this, but there's also, great climate podcasts. But we're mostly reaching each other. And the challenge has been going beyond that choir, right? The choir knows we know too much, and too much of the public doesn't know enough. And that's why I tried so hard to get the networks interested, but they had every excuse. Mostly our viewers are not interested. And as I say often, since when do you do news based on popularity? And by the way, you mentioned people dying of COVID in the hospitals. We know how bad misinformation is when you read about people who wouldn't even acknowledge they had COVID. It was killing them. And that's because of their, right-wing media sources, news sources, giving them this false information. I mean, on your deathbed, you still don't even know really, or you can't accept what you're dying of? Like, how extreme is that?
I don't have a good answer for you, Betsy. I'm sorry.
Well, we know the problems. I like to end on a positive note. This is Code Green Conversations for a Future We Want and Our Kids Deserve. I don't know if you're a father, but I'm a mother and a grandmother. Started this when my daughter was 2, my granddaughter's 2. What can people do? Hopefully, they're watching this and saying they agree with us, what we're saying, all these problems. And it's so much worse right now in the wake of these just recent, more than layoffs, just purging. But let's try to end on a positive note.
I mean, I think the obvious one for this conversation is support independent media. I
Thank
mean,
you.
we've mentioned a lot of good nonprofits that are out there. ProPublica didn't come up as well, but they do fantastic climate reporting also. I mean, obviously, I'm going to pitch myself here, climatecoloredgoggles.com. But I'm one of many. Emily Atkin Heated is a fantastic Substack. If you haven't had her on, you should. Jonathan Thompson, at Landesk, Miranda Green, who does Evergreen. There's a bunch of really good people out there doing really good work, and they're worthy of support.
And I hope I can include myself without
Oh yes, Betsy, please.
thank you. Long time. I've funded it myself. That's crazy. I've given myself till May to get some
Yeah.
support. It should not be so impossible. And the silver green lining from all these layoffs may be that some of the funders, philanthropists, whatever, who ignored this key piece, bringing the public along with this epic challenge we face, will see that it's independent journalists, we're the ones that are telling the truth. We have no jobs or money to lose, as I say. We are connecting those dots. We are focusing on solutions, and we need to be supported too. And there's just been too little support. And, wonderful if people donate if they like your podcast, but those are small donations. We need some actual funding to scale, to build up, to go beyond the choir with social media and marketing and all the things that we journalists aren't necessarily the best at doing. I'll speak for myself. Thanks so much, Sammy. I highly recommend your pod. Tell people where they
Thank you.
can find you now. What's your
Oh yeah,
current
my,
name?
my newsletter, you can sign up at climatecoloredgoggles.com. I publish as often as I can, which this week was 4 times, which I don't know how that happened, but hopefully is more like usually once or twice a week.
Well, I highly encourage everybody to read the columns. Great stuff. I mean, that's where I learned more
Yep.
about. I didn't know about Barry Weiss and her, other operation being such an anti-climate person. It's not surprising, but it's disgusting. On top of
Mhm.
everything else, with the Trump connections, with the Republican
Mhm.
connections. So we got to fight harder and louder and more often. I'll say that if you enjoyed this conversation, please support both of us. I'm going to put a donate button on my about to be launched new website. But if you don't,
Congratulations.
thank you. We need subscribers and we need viewers. That helps get the algorithms up. So YouTube, perhaps notices us. And so please go to YouTube, put in at Betsy Rosenberg interviews, and then subscribe. Also BetsyRosenberg.com, so you can get the email that goes along with the podcast, so you can read all about Sammy's background, and also links to where you can find you. Thanks so much. I am a woman on e-mission. My mission has been breaking through the green ceiling, which is twice as thick as the glass ceiling, maybe now more than twice. Just like treat it like COVID, treat it like the emergency it is. It affects everybody. It's not going away as we continue to either ignore it, or in this case, the administration making it worse. And anyone, especially who's a parent or grandparent, it's just not okay for us to continue in oblivion and ignorance. And I think people my age should get more involved, because supposedly we have more time and money, resources to support the spreading of information, but not just information, inspiration. And yes, culture, TV producers, film producers are stepping up, but it can't just be a little, shot of a recycling bin, in a half an hour, 1 hour show. It's got to be, I think, more direct. And there have been programs over the last 5 years or so, maybe a little longer, some of them, that will do a whole episode on it, but that's rare and far and few between. But that part is a good sign. But my goodness, why couldn't we have had that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when some of us were doing this work? Thank you for your great work, Sammy.
Thank you, Betsy.
Pray for humanity, sanity, and less Sean Hannity. We got to laugh, right?
That's good. That's good.
Thank you.